All right, y'all, we are on Manifest Destiny and the U.S. Indian Wars. So right here it says Indigenous lands. You see that? Within the United States, 1492 through 1977. So the whole area of the United States was indigenous land in 1492. By 1820, half of it wasn't indigenous. By 1840, it's starting not even smaller. 1860, by 1977, indigenous land within the United States. I just want to show you the pictures of that land. That's the picture it shows. So, while the U.S. was in the process of establishing itself as an imperialist world power, it was still struggling to consolidate itself as a continental base, encountering armed resistance by First Nations. Prior to the U.S.-British War of 1812, Louisiana was purchased from France in 1803, and Spain had ceded Florida in 1819. By 1824, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was organized as part of the War Department. Military campaigns were launched against First Nations from the Shawnee of the Mississippi Valley to the Seminole in Florida. At the same time, the legalistic instruments for occupation were being introduced. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act was implemented, and in 1834, Congress reorganized the various departments dealing with Indian repression by creating the U.S. Department of Indian Affairs and the Indian Trade and Intercourse Act, which redefined the Indian Territory and permanent Indian frontier. The Indian Territory had been previously defined in 1825 as lands west of the Mississippi. Following the formation of the territories of Wisconsin and Iowa, the frontier was extended from the Mississippi to the 95th meridian. The Indian Removal Act was directed at forced relocation of natives east of the 95th meridian to the west of it. In 1838, U.S. troops forced thousands of Cherokee. In 1838, U.S. troops forced thousands of Cherokee into concentration camps from which they were forced westward on the Trail of Tears. In the midst of winter, 1 out of every 4 Cherokees died from cold, hunger, or diseases. In the midst of winter, 1 out of every 4 Cherokee died from cold, hunger, or diseases. Many other nations were forcibly relocated. The Choctaws, Chickasaws, Creeks, Shawnees, Miamis, Ottawas, Wendats, and Delawares. The permanent Indian frontier was a militarized line of U.S. garrisons similar to that in Argentina and Chile during the same period. But the Indian frontier was not to behold. Like the British Royal Proclamation of 1763, the restrictions of Europeans settling or trading in these regions were routinely ignored. With the U.S. annexation of northern Mexico in 1848, the U.S. acquired the territories of Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. The same year, gold was discovered in California. With these two events, the large-scale invasion of the Indian Territory was underway. Under the ideology of Manifest Destiny, the U.S. was to launch a renewed period of genocidal war against those regions and First Nations which remained unsubjugated. The theater of war extended from the Great Lakes region around Minnesota, south of the Rio Grande, and west to California, extending north to Washington State. It was a period of war which involved many First Nations: the Lakota, Cheyenne, Comanche, Kiowa, Yakima, Nez Perce, Walla Walla, Cayuse, Arapaho, the Arapaho, Apache, Navajo, Shoshone, Kickapoos, and many others. The guy I lived with, he said they were part of the Hohola. He said his grandpa was a chief. It was also a war from which many native leaders would leave a legacy of struggle that, like those struggles in South and Mesoamerica, would remain as symbols of resistance to the European colonization. Crazy Horse, Tatanka Yotanka, Sitting Bull, that's what it means, Crazy Horse. And then there's Tatanka Yotanka, Sitting Bull. 10 Bears, Victorio, Geronimo, Cuna Parker, Wovoka, Black Kettle, crazy, Red Cloud, Chief Joseph, and so many others. Although the Indian wars of this period were by no means one-sided, The U.S. forces suffered many defeats. The U.S. colonial forces succeeded in gradually and ruthlessly gaining dominance. Various factors contributed to this, following the patterns of previous campaigns against native peoples. The continuing spread of diseases such as measles, smallpox, and cholera between 1837 and through 70, at least 4 major smallpox epidemics swept through the western plains, and between 1850 through 60, a cholera epidemic hit the Great Basin and southern plains. The use of informers and traders and the overwhelming strength of the U.S. forces in both weaponry and numbers of soldiers. Okay, so what does it say? So the use of a Great Basin, wait, at least 4 major smallpox epidemics swept through the western plains. Between 1850 through 1860, a cholera epidemic hit the Great Basin and southern plains. The use of informers and traders and the overwhelming strength of U.S. forces in both weaponry and numbers of soldiers, combined with outright treachery and policies of extermination, these factors continue to erode the strength of once powerful First Nations. One of the major turning points in this period can be seen as the U.S. Civil War. One of the major turning points in this period can be seen as the U.S. Civil War. So I wonder, that's getting interesting now. So look at that is Tatanka Yotanka Sitting Bull. Look, he looks like a guy named Mario I used to work with. I think, shout out to my homie Spence, he knows what I'm talking about. Very indigenous, you know what I mean? So that's the end of that chapter, I believe. The next chapter is African slavery, African rebellion, and the U.S. Civil War. Anyway, peace.